Welcome back to Deadman's Tales. I'm your host, Deadman. Today, we're looking at a story from r/nosleep. Story title: If you hear tapping on your window, she's found you. Up until yesterday, I've never heard of the Whimpering Woman. I was at my friend Dan's house, drinking a couple of beers with him, because he's been very depressed this past week and a half. I was there to try and find out what's been wrong with him, and why he's been so distant. We're normally hanging out all of the time doing fun stuff. Lately, however, he's been ignoring my texts and calls. And if he does answer, he's just consistently declining my offers of fun things to do. I don't feel like it. I'm just gonna hang at home, he says in a monotone voice before ending the call abruptly. So yesterday, I showed up at his house with a fifth of vodka and a 12-pack. Dan's never been able to decline a fun night of drinking. And when he answered the door and saw me standing on his porch with booze, he smiled and invited me in. Halfway through the fifth, and 3 beers later, I finally asked him what's been going on. He let out a deep sigh.
You wouldn't believe me even if I told you, Kevin.
I felt upset that my own best friend didn't think I'd trust him. Dude, come on. You're my best friend. Of course I'll believe you, I assured him. He sat there silent for a moment, obviously debating on telling me. Finally, after another heavy sigh, he shook his head yes.
You're right. Besides, I gotta tell someone.
His eyes began to water. I figured the vodka was beginning to kick in. From here on out, I'll just tell you guys as if Dan's telling the story. It'll be easier.
So, a week or two ago, I was over at this girl's house that I met at Schmitty's. You know, the bar? She was this cute gothic type and seemed like a ton of fun. She was bubbly, yet cocky. She knew she was hot and wasn't afraid to show it. Anyways, after an hour or two of us hitting it off, she invited me back to her place. Of course I accepted. So, 20 minutes later, we were walking up the porch to this huge house just outside of town. Her nearest neighbor was at least 3 football fields away, so it was way more secluded than I'm used to. Anyway, once we get inside, we start making out and things are going great. Better than great, actually. So, after about an hour, I pause to breathe, and then I happen to notice all of her windows are blacked out with these thick, black curtains that were nailed to her window frames. There was no way to open these curtains, so I asked her about it. She got all weird and told me it was nothing, that she didn't like the sun. Then she quickly started kissing me again, trying to distract me from questioning her again. Of course it worked. Anyways, later, we're laying in bed, and I happen to look over and notice all of the bedroom windows are blocked off, just like all the other ones. Seriously though, what's with the windows? I asked curiously. She stared at the ceiling for a moment, like she was thinking of what to say.
I don't want the Whimpering Woman to get me,
she whispers, and her voice cracks as if she's about to cry. The Whimpering Woman? I asked, confused. I looked over and noticed a tear running down her face. She looked at me with watery eyes and nodded yes. She must have seen the confusion on my face because she started to explain.
Yeah, you'll know she's found you when, you hear the tapping on your windows at night. Once she does find you, she'll never leave you alone.
At this point, she looked like she was staring off into space as tears were rolling down her face. So, I was pretty confused and very creeped out. I changed the subject and made some lame excuse to go home. I didn't want to stay and hang out with a crazy woman, so I got the hell out of Dodge. I couldn't stop thinking about her story, though, for the whole next day, and when night came, I was pretty nervous.
It was at this point I looked around and somehow just noticed that all of Dan's windows were covered with dark curtains, stapled shut.
I sat in bed jumping at every creak the house made. Finally, around 1 in the morning, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I know, I'm sitting up panting, sweat rolling down my forehead. The house is completely quiet. All my senses are on high alert. I have this wave of dread wash over me, like I've never felt. Then I hear it. Soft tapping on my window. A soft whimpering came immediately after from outside my bedroom window. My heart literally leaps into my throat. My adrenaline was pumping so bad I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. I tried to calm myself down so I could focus on listening. After a minute or two, I calmed down enough that my heartbeat isn't drowning out every other noise, so I creep to the window as quietly as possible. I look out, expecting to see someone in my yard, but it's empty. So, I let out a sigh of relief and walked back to my bed. I chuckled a little and convinced myself it was just my imagination, that I was in between sleep and consciousness. It works, and I cover up with blankets and roll over. I'm still a little spooked, so I cover my head, with the blankets. Just as I'm about to doze off, I hear it again, only this time it's much closer. It sounded like it came from right outside my window. I completely froze, paralyzed with fear. I listened as the whimpering became louder and louder. Then I heard something I'll never forget. The sound of my window sliding open. I'd never been so afraid in my entire life, man. I wanted to run out of my room, out of my house, but I couldn't. I couldn't move because I was so scared. Either that, or is my instincts telling me not to move a single muscle and not to even look at her. There was a soft thud following another. I'm assuming it was her feet hitting my floor. Her whimpering sounded like she was in pure agony, like she was completely heartbroken. It honestly made me feel sad too. Still, I didn't move a muscle. The floor creaked after each thud of her footsteps. As she slowly made her way to my bed, I thought my heart was going to explode. It was beating so hard. I listened as she walked right up to my bed, then stopped. The house was quieter than I'd heard in my entire life. So quiet that my eardrums would almost explode. She wasn't whimpering or moving or anything. After what felt like an eternity, I felt the last thing on earth I wanted to feel in that moment. My bed sunk in right beside me, and she got in the bed next to me. Her face pressed right into the back of my neck.
I was getting goosebumps, looking over my shoulder, paranoid.
She started breathing rapidly, like she was overly excited. I honestly thought I was going to die. Then, by the grace of God, she climbed out of my bed, and it sounded like she scrambled like a wild animal to the window and left. I almost thought it was a trap, or a ploy to get me to come out from under the covers. I hid under the blankets for hours. At some point, I must have passed out from pure exhaustion, because next thing I know, I'm flailing in bed to my alarms blasting. That's why my windows are covered. I saw that girl do it, so I think it at least keeps her out of my room at night. I still hear her whimper every single night, right outside my window. She hasn't come in my room since that first night, though.
I sat, looking at Dan in complete shock. I didn't have any words that would come out of my mouth, let alone make him feel better. I could tell he wasn't messing with me. He was telling the truth, and there wasn't any way I could help him. After 20 minutes of awkward silence, he asked me if I minded leaving him for the night. I apologized about the situation and gave him a hug goodbye. I hate to admit it, but I didn't want to be there any longer either. I was spooked. I spent the rest of the night jumping at every little noise I heard. A little after midnight, I put my phone down and attempted to sleep. Just as I was about to fall asleep, I heard something that chilled me to the bone. A soft tapping coming from outside my window. Ooh, sounds like the scary lady just wanted to cuddle to me. Well, thanks again for listening to Deadman's Tales.